Caves of Terror by Talbot Mundy. Chapter 1. The Grey Mahatma. Meldrum Strange has a way with him. You need all your tact to get him past the quarreling point. But once that point is left behind, there isn't a finer business boss in the universe. He likes to put his ringer on a desk bell and feel somebody jump in Tibet or Wei Hei Wei or Honolulu. That's Meldrum Strange. When he sent me from San Francisco, where I was enjoying a vacation, to New York, where he was enjoying business, I took the first train. "You've been a long time on the way," he remarked as I walked into his office 20 minutes after the Chicago Flyer reached Grand Central Station. "Look at this," he growled, shoving into my hand a clipping from a Western newspaper. "What about it?" I asked when I had finished reading. "While you were wasting time on the West Coast, this office has been busy," he snorted, looking more like General Grant than ever as he pulled out a cigar and started chewing it. "We've taken this matter up with the British government, and we've been retained to look into it. You want me to go to Washington, I suppose? You've got to go to India at once." "That clipping is 2 months old," I answered. "Why didn't you wire me when I was in Egypt to go on from there?" "Look at this," he answered, and shoved a letter across the desk. It bore the address of a club in Simla, Meldrum Strange, Esquire, Messrs. Grimm, Ramsden and Ross, New York. "Dear Sir, having recently resigned my commission in the British Indian Army, I am free to offer my services to your firm, provided you have a sufficiently responsible position here in India to offer me. My qualifications and record are known to the British Embassy in Washington, D.C., to whom I am permitted to refer you, and it is at the suggestion of—" He gave the name of a British cabinet minister who is known the wide world over, "that I am making this proposal. He was good enough to promise his endorsement to any application I might care to make. If this should interest you, please send me a cablegram, on receipt of which I will hold my services at your disposal until your letter has time to reach Simla, when, if your terms are satisfactory, I will cable my acceptance without further delay. Yours faithfully, Athelstan King, VC, DSO, etc." "Do you know who he is?" demanded Strange. "That's the fellow who went to Kinjan Caves, the best Secret Service officer the British ever had. I cabled him, of course. Here's his contract. You take it to him. Here's the whole dope about this propaganda. Take the quickest route to India, sign up this man King, and go after them at that end for all the two of you are worth. That's all. My passport being unexpired, I could make the Mauritania and did. Moreover, I was merciless to the expense account. An aeroplane took me from Liverpool to London, another from London to Paris. I don't care how often you arrive in Bombay. The thrill increases. You steam in at dawn by Garipuri just as the gun announces sunrise, and the dreamy bay glimmers like a prophet's vision. Temples, domes, minarets, palm trees, roofs, towers, and masts. Almost before the anchor had splashed into the spawn-skeined water off the Apollo Bunder, a native boat drew alongside, and a very well-dressed native climbed up the companion ladder in quest of me. I had sent King a wireless, but his messenger was away in advance of even the bankers' agents who flock on board to tout for customs business. He handed me a letter which simply said that the bearer, Gulab Lal Singh, would look after me and my belongings. So I paid attention to the man. He was a strapping fellow, handsome as the deuce, with a Roman nose and the eye of a gentleman unafraid. He said that Major King was in Bombay, but detained by urgent business. However, he invited me to Major King's quarters for breakfast, so instead of waiting for the regular launch, I got into the native sailboat with him, and he seemed to have some sort of talisman for charming officials, for on the quay an officer motioned us through without even examining my passport. We drew up finally in front of a neat little bungalow in a long street of similar buildings, intended for British officials. Gulab Lal Singh took me straight into the dining room and carried in breakfast with his own hands, standing behind my chair in silence while I ate. Without much effort, I could see his face in the mirror to my right, and when I thought he wasn't noticing, I studied him carefully. "Is there anything further that the Sahib would care for?" he asked when the meal was finished. "Yes," I said, pulling out an envelope. "Here's your contract, Major King. If you're agreeable, we may as well get that signed and mailed to New York." I expected to see him look surprised, but he simply sat down at the table, read the contract over, and signed it. Then we went out onto a veranda that was shut off from the street by brown Casca's tatties. "How long does it take you to grow a beard?" was his first, rather surprising question. It was not long before I learned how differently he could treat different individuals. He had simply chosen his extraordinary way of receiving me as the best means of getting a real line on me without much loss of time. He did not compliment me on having seen through his disguise or apologize for his own failure to keep up the deception. He sat opposite and studied me as he might the morning newspaper, and I returned the compliment. "You see," he said suddenly, as if a previous conversation had been interrupted. "Since the war, governments have lost their grip, so I resigned from the army. You look to me like a kind of godsend. Is Meldrum Strange as wealthy as they say?" I nodded. "Is he playing for power?" "He's out to do the world good, but he enjoys the feel of it. He is absolutely on the level." "I have a letter from Strange, in which he says you've hunted and prospected all over the world. Does that include India?" I nodded. "Know any of the languages? Enough Hindustani to deceive a foreigner." "Punjabi?" I nodded. Mind you, I was supposed to be this fellow's boss. "I think we'll be able to work together," he said after another long look at me. "Are you familiar with the facts?" he asked me. "I have the dossier with me. Studied it on the ship, of course." "You understand, then? The Princess Yasmini and the Grey Mahatma are the two keys. The government daren't arrest either because it would inflame mob passion. There's too much of that already. I'm not in position to play this game alone. Can't afford to. I've joined the firm to get backing for what I want to do. I'd like that point clear. As long as we're in harness together, I'll take you into confidence. But I expect absolutely free rein." "All right," I said. And for 2 hours he unfolded to me a sort of panorama of Indian intrigue, including dozens of statements of sheer fact that not one person in a million would believe if set down in cold print. "So you see," he said at last, "there's something needed in the way of unobtrusive inspection if the rest of the world is to have any kind of breathing spell. If you've no objection, we'll leave Bombay tonight and get to work." Athelstan King and I arrived, after certain hot days and choking nights, at a city in the Punjab that has had 9 names in the course of history. It lies by a winding wide river whose floods have changed the landmarks every year since men took to fighting for the common heritage. The tremendous wall, along whose base the river sucks and sweeps for more than a third of the city's whole circumference, has to be kept repaired by endless labor, but there are compensations. The fierce current guards and gives privacy to a score of palaces and temples, as well as a burning ghat. The city has been very little altered by the vandal hand of progress. There is a red steel railway bridge, but the same framework carries a bullock road. From the bridge's northern end, as far as the bazaar, the main street goes winding roughly parallel with the waterfront. Trees arch over it like a cathedral roof, and through the huge branches the sun turns everything beneath to gold, so that even the impious sacred monkeys achieve vicarious beauty, and the scavenger mongrel dogs scratch, sleep, and are miserable in an aureole. There are modern signs, as for instance, a post office, some telegraph wires on which birds of 1,000 colors perch with an air of perpetual surprise, and, tucked away in the city's busiest maze, not 400 yards from the western wall, the office of the Sikh apothecary, Mulji Singh. Mulji Singh takes life seriously, which is a laborious thing to do, and being an apostle of simple sanitation is looked at askance by the populace, but he persists. King's specialty is making use of unconsidered trifles and misunderstood babus. King was attired as a native when we sought out Mulji Singh together and found him in a back street with a 100-yard-long waiting list of low-caste and altogether casteless cripples. And of course, Mulji Singh had all the gossip of the city at his fingers' ends. When he closed his office at last, and we came inside to sit with him. He loosed his tongue and would have told us everything he knew if King had not steered the flow of information between channels. "Aye, Sahib, and this Mahatma, they say, is a very holy fellow who works miracles. Sometimes he sits under a tree by the burning ghat, but at night he goes to the temple of the Tirthankars, where none dare follow him, although they sit in crowds outside to watch him enter and leave. The common rumor is that at night he leaves his body lifeless in a crypt in that Tirthankar temple and flies to heaven, where he fortifies himself with fresh magic. But I know where he goes by night. There comes to me with boils a one-legged sweeper who cleans a black panther's cage. The panther took his other leg. He sleeps in a cage beside the panther's, and it is a part of his duty to turn the panther loose on intruders. It is necessary that they warn this one-legged fellow whenever a stranger is expected by night, who should not be torn to pieces. Night after night he is warned. Night after night there comes this Mahatma to spend the hours in heaven. There are places less like heaven than her palace." "Is he your only informant?" King demanded. "Aye, Sahib, the only one on that count. But there is another, whose foot was caught between stone and stone when they lowered a trapdoor once in that Tirthankar temple. He bade the Tirthankars heal his foot, but instead they threw him out for having too much knowledge of matters that they said do not concern him. And he says that the trapdoor opens into a passage that leads under the wall into a chamber from which access is obtained by another trapdoor to a building inside her palace grounds within a stone throw of that panther's cage. And he, too, says that the Mahatma goes nightly to her palace." "Are there any stories of her?" King inquired. "Thousands, Sahib, but no two agree. It is known that she fell foul of the Raj in some way, and they made her come to this place. I was here when she came. She has a household of 100 women, mounds of furniture, mourns of it, Sahib. She gave orders to her men servants to be meek and inoffensive, so when they moved in, there were not more than 10 fights between them and the city folk who thought they had as much right to the streets. There was a yellow-fanged northern devil who marshaled the serving men, and it is he who keeps her palace gate. He keeps it well. None trespass." "What other visitors does she entertain besides the Mahatma?" "Many, Sahib, though few enter by the front gate. There are tales of men being drawn up by ropes from boats in the river." "Is there word of why they come?" "Sahib, the little naked children weave stories of her doings. Each has a different tale. They call her Empress of the Hidden Arts. They say that she knows all the secrets of the priests and that there is nothing that she cannot do, because the gods love her, and the Rakshasas, male evil spirits, and Apsaras, female evil spirits, do her bidding." "What about this Tirthankar temple? Who controls it?" "None knows that, Sahib. It is so richly endowed that its priests despise men's gifts. None is encouraged to worship in that place. When those old Tirthankars stir abroad, they have no dealings with folk in this city that any man knows of." "Are you sure they are Tirthankars?" asked King. "I am sure of nothing, Sahib. For aught I know, they are devils." King gave him a small sum of money, and we walked away toward the burning ghat, where there was nothing but a mean smell and a few old men with rakes gathering up ashes. But outside the ghat, where a golden mohur tree cast a wide shadow across the road, there was a large crowd sitting and standing in rings around an absolutely naked, ash-smeared religious fanatic. The fanatic appeared to have the crowd bewildered, for he cursed and blessed on no comprehensible schedule and gave extraordinary answers to the simplest questions, not acknowledging a question at all unless it suited him. And King and I had not been there a minute before someone asked him about the Princess Yasmini. "Aha! Who stares at the fire burns his eyes. A burned eye is of less use than a raw one." Some laughed, but not many. Most of them seemed to think there was deep wisdom in his answer to be dug for meditatively, as no doubt there was. Then a man on the edge of the crowd a long way off from me, who wore the air of a humorist, asked him about me. "Does the shadow of this foreigner offend your honour's holiness?" None glanced in my direction. That might have given the game away. It is considered an exquisite joke to discuss a white man to his face without his knowing it. The Grey Mahatma did not glance in my direction either. As a bird in the river, as a fish in the air, as a man in trouble is the foreigner in Hind, he answered. Then he suddenly began declaiming, making his voice ring as if his throat were brass, yet without moving his body or shifting his head by a hair's breadth. The universe was chaos. He said, "Let order prevail," and order came out of the chaos and prevailed. The universe was in darkness. He said, "Let there be light, and let it prevail over darkness." And light came out of the womb of darkness and prevailed. He ordained the Kali Yuga, an age of darkness, in which all Hind should lie at the feet of foreigners. And thus ye lie in the dust. But there is an end of night, and so there is an end to Kali Yuga. Bide ye the time and watch. King drew me away, and we returned up street between old temples and new iron-fronted stores toward Mulji Singh's quarters, where he had left the traveling bag that we shared between us. "Is that Grey Mahatma linked up with propaganda in the USA?" I asked, wondering. "What's more," King answered, "he's dangerous. He's sincere, the most dangerous type of politician in the world, the honest visionary, in love with an abstract theory, capable of offering himself for martyrdom. Watch him now." The crowd was beginning to close in on the Mahatma, seeking to touch him. Suddenly, he flew into a fury, seized a long stick from someone near him, and began beating them over the head, using both hands and laying on so savagely that ashes fell from him like pipe clay from a shaken bag, and several men ran away with the blood pouring down their faces. However, they were reckoned fortunate. "Some of those will charge money to let other fools touch them," said King. "Come on, let's call on her now." So we returned to Mulji Singh's stuffy little office, and King changed into a major's uniform. "It isn't exactly according to Hoyle to wear this," he explained. "However, she doesn't know I've resigned from the army." The Palace of Yasmini, Caves of Terror. Chapter 2. Nobody saw us walk up to Yasmini's palace gate and knock, for whoever was abroad in the heat was down by the Ghat admiring the Mahatma. The bearded giant who had admitted us stood staring at King, his long, strong fingers twitching. In his own good time, King turned and saw fit to recognize him. "Oh, hello, Ismail." He held a hand out, but the savage flung arms about him that were as strong as the iron gate clamps, and King had to fight to break free from the embrace. "Now Allah be praised, he is Father of mercies. She warned me," he croaked. "She knows the smell of dawn at midnight. She said, 'He cometh soon,' and none believed her, save only I. This very dawn said she, 'Thou, Ismail,' she said, 'be asleep at the gate when he cometh, and thine eyes shall be thrown to the city dogs.' Aye, oh ho." King nodded to lead on, and Ismail obeyed with a deal of pantomime intended to convey a sense of partnership with roots in the past and its fruition now. The way was down a passage between high carved walls so old that antiquarians burn friendship in disputes not so much about the century as the very era of that quiet art, under dark arches with latticed windows into unexpected gardens fresh with the smell of sprinkled water, by ancient bronze gateways into other passages that opened into stone-paved courts with fountains in the midst, building joining on to building and court meeting court until, where an old black panther snarled at us between iron bars, an arch and a solid bronze door admitted us at last into the woman's pleasance, a wonderland of jasmine, magnolia, and pomegranates set about a marble pool and therein mirrored among rainbow-colored fishes. Beyond the pool, a flight of marble steps rose 50 feet until it passed through a many-windowed wall into the Panch Mahal, the quarters of the women. At their foot, Ismail halted. "Go thou up alone. Leave this elephant with me," he said, nudging me and pointing with his thumb toward a shady bower against the garden wall. Without acknowledging that pleasantry, King took my arm and we went straight forward together, our tread resounding strangely on steps that for centuries had felt no sterner shock than that of soft slippers and naked, jeweled feet. We were taking nobody entirely by surprise. That much was obvious. Before we reached the top step, two women opened a door and ran to meet us. One woman threw over King's head such a prodigious garland of jasmine buds that he had to loop it thrice about his shoulders. Then each took a hand of one of us, and we entered between doors of many-colored wood, treading on mat-strewn marble, their bare feet pattering beside ours. There were rustlings to right and left, and once I heard laughter, smothered instantly. At last, at the end of a wide hall before many-hued silken curtains, our two guides stopped. As they released our hands, with the always surprising strength that is part of the dancing woman's stock in trade, they slipped behind us suddenly and thrust us forward through the curtains. There was not much to see in front of us. We found ourselves in a panelled corridor whose narrow windows overlooked the river, facing a painted door 60 paces distant at the farther end. King strode down the corridor and knocked. The answer was one word that I did not catch, although it rang like a suddenly struck chord of music, and the door yielded to the pressure of King's hand. I entered behind him, and the door swung shut of its own weight with a click. We were in a high-ceilinged, very long room, having 7 sides. There were windows to right and left. A deep divan piled with scented cushions occupied the whole length of one long wall, and there were several huge cushions on the floor against another wall. There was one other door besides that we had entered by. We stood in that room alone, but I know that King felt as uneasy as I did, for there was sweat on the back of his neck. We were being watched by unseen eyes. There is no mistaking that sensation. Suddenly, a voice broke silence like a golden bell whose overtones go widening in rings into infinity, and a vision of loveliness parted the curtains of that other door. "My lord comes as is meet, spurred and ready to give new kingdoms to his king. Oh, how my lord is welcome," she said in Persian. Her voice thrilled you because of its perfect resonance, exactly in the middle of the note. She looked into King's eyes with challenging familiarity that made him smile, and then eyed me wonderingly. She glanced from me to a picture on the wall in blue of the elephant god, enormous, opulent, urbane, and then back again at me, and smiled very sweetly. "So you have brought Ganesha with you? The god of good luck. How wonderful! How does one behave toward a real god?" And while she said that she laid her hands on King's arms as naturally as if he were a lover whom she had not seen perhaps since yesterday. Plainly, there was absolutely nothing between him and her except his own obstinate independence. She was his, if he wanted her. She took King's hand with a laugh that had its roots in past companionship and led him to the middle, deepest window seat, beneath which the river could be heard gurgling busily. Then, when she had drawn the silken hangings until the softened light suggested lingering, uncounted hours, and had indicated with a nod to me a cushion in the corner, she came and lay on the cushions close to King, chin on hand, where she could watch his eyes. King sat straight and square, watching her with caution that he did not trouble to conceal. She took his hand and raised the sleeve until the broad, gold, graven bracelet showed. "That link forged in the past must bind us 2 more surely than an oath," she said, smiling. "I used it to show to the gatekeeper." He sat coolly waiting for her next remark, and with almost unnecessary candor began to remove the bracelet and offer it back to her. So she unmasked her batteries with a delicious little rippling laugh and a lazy, cat-like movement that betokened joy in the danger that was coming, if I know anything at all of what sign language means. "I knew that very day that you resigned your commission in the army, and I laughed with delight at the news, knowing that the gods who are our servants had contrived it. 'I know why thou art here,' she said. and the change from you to thou was not haphazard. It is well known, Princess, that your spies are the cleverest in India, King answered. Spies? I need no spies as long as old India lives. Friends are better. Do all princesses break their promises? He countered, meeting her eyes steadily. Never yet did I break one promise, whether it was for good or evil. Princess, he answered, looking sternly at her. In Jamrud Fort, you agreed to take no part again in politics, national or international, in return for a promise of personal freedom and permission to reside in India. My promise was dependent on my liberty. But is this liberty, to be forced to reside in this old palace, with the spies of the government keeping watch on my doings, except when they chance to be outwitted? Nevertheless, I have kept my promise. Thou knowest me better than to think that I need to break promises in order to outwit a government of Englishmen. Quibbles won't help, Princess, he answered. You promised to do nothing that government might object to. Well, will they object to my religion? She retorted, mocking him. Has the British Raj at last screwed up its courage to the point of trespassing behind the purdah and blundering in among religious exercises? No man in his senses ever challenges a woman's argument until he knows the whole of it and has unmasked its ulterior purpose. So King sat still and said nothing, knowing that that was precisely what she did not want. You must make terms with me, heaven-born, she went on, changing her tone to one of rather more suggestive firmness. The Kali Yuga, age of darkness, is drawing to a close, and India awakes. There is froth on the surface, a rising here, an agitation there, a deal of wild talk everywhere, and the dead old government proposes to suppress it in the dead old ways, like men with paddles seeking to beat the waves down flat. But the winds of God blow, and the boat of the men with the paddles will be upset presently. Who then shall ride the storm? Their gunners will be told to shoot the froth as it forms and rises. But if there is a wise man anywhere, he will make terms with me, and will set himself to guide the underlying forces that may otherwise whelm everything. I think thou art wise, my heaven-born. Thou wert wise once on a time. Do you think you can rule India? King asked her, and he did not make the mistake of suggesting ridicule. Who else can do it? She retorted. Do you think we come into the world to let fate be our master? Why have I royal blood and royal views, wealth, understanding and ambition, while the others have blindness and vague yearnings? Can you answer? Princess, he answered, I had only one object in coming here. I know that, she said, nodding. I have simply come to warn you. Chat, she answered with her chin between her hands and her elbows deep in the cushions. I know how much is known. This man, what is his name? Ramsden? Puff. Ganesha here is far better. Ganesha is from America. Those fools who went to prepare the American mind for what is coming because they were altogether too foolish to be anything but in the way in India have been found out, and Ganesha has come like a big bull buffalo to save the world by thrusting his clumsy horns into things he does not understand. I tell you, Athelstan, that however much is known, there is much more that is not known. You would better make terms with me. What you must understand, Princess, is that your plan to overthrow the West and make the East the world's controlling force is known by those who can prevent you, he answered quietly. You see, I can't go away from here and tell whoever asks me that you are observing your promise to— No, she interrupted, with a ringing, merry laugh of triumph. You speak truth without knowing it. You cannot go away. Princess Yasmini's boast was good, but we had come to solve a problem, not to run away with it, and she looked disconcerted by our rather obvious willingness to be her prisoners for a while. Do you think I cannot be cruel? She asked suddenly. I have seen you at your worst, as well as at your best, King answered. You act like a man who has resources, yet you have none, she answered slowly, as if reviewing all the situation in her mind. None knows where you are, not even Mulji Singh, with whom you left your other clothes before putting on that uniform the better to impress me. The bag that you and Ganesha share between you, like two mendicants emerging from the jail, is now in a room in this palace. You came because you saw that if I should be arrested, there would be insurrection. You said so to Omani Sahib, and his butler overheard. But not even Omani knows where you are. He said to you, if you can defeat that woman without using violence, you'll stand alone in the world as the one man who could do it. But if you use violence, though you kill her, she will defeat you and all the rest of us. Is not that what your friend Omani said? What kind of terms do you want me to make with you, princess? King answered. I can make you ruler of all India, she said. Another may wear the baubles, but thou shalt be the true king, even as thy name is. And behind thee, me, Yasmini, whispering wisdom and laughing to see the politicians strut. King leaned back and laughed at her. Do you really expect me to help you ruin my own countrymen? Go back on my color, creed, education, oath and everything, and... Deluded fools. The East, Athelstan is waking. Better make terms with me, and thou shalt live to ride on the arising East as God rides on the wind and bits and governs it. Very well, he said. Show me. I'll do nothing blindfold. Ah, thou art not half conquered yet, she laughed. And what of Ganesha? Is this mountain of bones and thews a person to be trusted? Or shall we show him how much stronger than him is a horsehair in a clever woman's fingers? This man Ramsden is my friend, King said. Are you his friend? She retorted. He nodded. You are going to see the naked heart of India, she said. Better to have your eyes burned out now than see that and be false to it afterward. Then, since we failed to order red-hot needles for our eyes, she cried out once, one clear note that sounded almost exactly as if she had struck a silver gong. A woman entered like the living echo to it. Yasmini spoke, and the woman disappeared again. Below us the river swallowed and gurgled along the palace wall, and we caught the occasional thumping of a boat pole. The thumping ceased exactly underneath us, and a man began singing in the time-hallowed language of Rajasthan. I think he was looking upward as he sang, for each word reached its goal. Oh, warm and broad the plough-land lies, the idle oxen wait. We pray thee, holy river, rise nor glut thy fields too late. The year awakes, the slumbering seed swells to its birth. O river, heed. Strange time of year for that song, princess. Is that one of your spies? Asked King, not too politely. One of my friends, she answered. I told you, India awakes, but watch. It was growing dark. Two women came and drew the curtains closer. Other women brought lamps and set them on stools along one wall. Others again brought tapers and lit the candles in the hydra-headed candelabra. It is really too light yet, Yasmini grumbled, as if the gods who marshal in the night had not kept faith with her. But even so, the shadows danced among India's gods on the wall facing the row of stools. Then there began woodwind music made by musicians out of sight, low and sweet, suggesting unimaginable mysteries, and one by one through the curtains opposite, there came in silently 7 women on bare feet that hardly touched the carpet, and all the stories about Nauch girls, all the travelers' tales of how Eastern women dance with their arms, not feet, vanished that instant into the kingdom of lies. This was dancing, art absolute. They no longer seemed to be flesh and blood women possessed of weight and other limitations. Their footfall was hardly audible, and you could not hear them breathe at all. They were like living shadows, and they danced the way the shadows of the branches do on a jungle clearing when a light breeze makes the trees laugh. It had some sort of mystic meaning, no doubt, although I did not understand it. But what I did understand was that the whole arrangement was designed to produce a sort of mesmerism in the beholder. However, school yourself to live alone and think alone for a quarter of a century or so, meeting people only as man to man instead of like a sheep among a flock of sheep, and you become immune to that sort of thing. The Princess Yasmini seemed to realize that neither King nor I were being drawn into the net of dreaminess that those trained women of hers were weaving. "Watch," said Yasmini suddenly, and then we saw what very few men have been privileged to see. She joined the dance, and you knew then who had taught those women. Theirs had been, after all, a mere interpretation of her vision. Hers was the vision itself. She was it, the thing itself, no more an interpretation than anything in nature is. Yasmini became India, India's heart, and I suppose that if King and I had understood her, we would have been swept into her vortex, as it were, like drops of water into an ocean. She was unrestrained by any need or even willingness to explain herself. She was talking the same language that the nodding blossoms and the light and shadow talk that go chasing each other across the hillsides. And while you watched, you seemed to know all sorts of things, secrets that disappeared from your mind a moment afterward. She began singing presently, commencing on the middle F as every sound in nature does, and disregarding conventional limitations, just as she did when dancing. She sang first of the emptiness before the worlds were made. She sang of the birth of peoples, of the history of peoples. She sang of India as the mother of all speech, song, race, and knowledge, of truths that every great thinker since the world's beginning has propounded, and of India as the home of all of them, until, whether you would or not, at least you seemed to see the undeniable truth of that. And then, in a weird, wild, melancholy minor key, came the story of the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness creeping over India, condemning her for her sins. She sang of India under the hoof of ugliness and ignorance and plague, and yet of a few who kept the old light burning in secret, of hidden books, and of stuff that men call magic handed down the centuries from lip to lip in caves and temple cellars and mountain fastnesses, wherever the mysteries were safe from profane eyes. And then the key changed again, striking that fundamental middle F that is the mother note of all the voices of nature and, as Indians maintain, of the music of the spheres as well. Music and song and dance became laughter. Doubt vanished, for there seemed nothing left to doubt as she began to sing of India rising at last, again triumphant over darkness, mother of the world and of all the nations of the world, awake, unconquerable. Never was another song like that one, nor was there ever such a climax. As she finished on a chord of triumph that seemed like a new spirit bursting the bonds of ancient mystery and sank to the floor among her women, there stood the grey Mahatma in their midst, not naked any longer, but clothed from head to heel in a saffron-coloured robe and without his paste of ashes. He stood like a statue with folded arms, his yellow eyes blazing and his look like a lion's. And how he had entered the room, I confess I don't know to this hour, nor does Athelstan King, who is a trained observer of unusual happenings. Both doors were closed, and I will take oath that neither had been opened since the women entered. "Peace!" was his first word, spoken like one in authority who ordered peace and dared to do it. He stood looking for more than a minute at King and me with, I think, just a flicker of scorn on his thin lips, as if he were wondering whether we were men enough to face the ordeal before us. Then, indefinably, yet quite perceptibly, his mood changed and his appearance with it. He held his right hand out. "Will you not shake hands with me?" he asked, smiling. Now that was a thing that no sanctimonious Brahmin would have dreamed of doing, for fear of being defiled by the touch of a casteless foreigner. So he was either above or below the caste laws, and it is common knowledge how those who are below caste cringe and toady. So he evidently reckoned himself above it, and the Indian who can do that has met and overcome more tyranny and terrors than the West knows anything about. I wish I could make exactly clear what happened when I took his outstretched hand. His fingers closed on mine with a grip like marble. There are few men who are stronger than I am. I can outlift a stage professional, yet I could no more move his hand or pull mine free than if he had been a bronze image with my hand set solid in the casting. That is for your own good, he said pleasantly, letting go at last. That other man knows better, but you might have been so unwise as to try using violence. I'm glad you had that experience, said King in a low voice as I went back to the window seat. Don't let yourself be bewildered by it. There's an explanation for everything. They know something that we don't, that's all.